Tiffany, Dockery, who's the product manager at Amazon, is going to come on up. She's going to talk about know yourself, know your worth, overcoming imposter syndrome when you don't fit the mold. Let's have a good time. All right. Woo. What's up?
Here we go. All right. When I got my offer to be a product manager at Amazon, I literally almost cried, and it wasn't the stock options. Though those are great, I almost cried because it felt like vindication. You have to understand, 2 years prior to that moment, against the advice of friends, family members, mentors, I left what they all considered to be a dream job at Google to go back to business school for 2 years and take on 6 figures of debt. And I did it because I was tired of hearing about the latest innovation the company had released. I wanted to build and ship it. So in my final year of business school, when I got that offer to be a product manager at Amazon, it felt like this bet that I had taken was finally beginning to pay off. Oh, I don't have a clicker. There we go. Fast forward to my first day. I realized that I've been put on what was at the time a confidential, high-profile project to work on the launch of our first streaming media player, Amazon Fire TV. Not only that, I realized that I'm one of the youngest people on my team, one of few women, the only out LGBT person, as well as the only black person. At times, it felt like the entire building. That's tech. And all those things combined with the steep learning curve that anyone who starts at a place like Amazon encounters, I quickly started spiraling. I went from someone who was, by all accounts, confident and self-assured to someone who was racked with self-doubt. What's more, I started constantly apologizing because for the first time in my life, I was asking myself this question of, can I do this? Do I belong here? Am I good enough? The oatmeal's great for this, right? Like, I apologize. This was literally me. I would apologize for everything. Hello, I'm so sorry. I'll get right on that. And I think we can all identify with that. And so for me, though, it got worse before it got better. Things did turn around, though. And they turned around when I had what I now call my tech bro revelation. My team was having a developer retreat. I was running late, so I slipped into a breakout group that had already formed, and I overhear a developer who I only knew casually in this rare moment of vulnerability. He was talking about how he, too, was constantly racked with self-doubt, and how he, too, worried that he'd be fired because people would realize they made a mistake in hiring him, which was something I, too, had literally said to a friend. And then, to my amazement, the group of mostly white and South Asian male developers nodded in agreement. And that was a turning point, because imposter syndrome became something that wasn't wrong with me, but a human problem. And I knew that I could attack it the way I'd attacked every other human problem I'd faced in my life, with a plan. So what I want to talk with you, we're all planners here, what I want to talk with you guys about today is a 5-step plan that I employed. Now, to be honest, it was more than 5 steps, but they told me if I didn't get off of here by 11 minutes, they'll play music, so I'm giving you the highlight reel. But the first thing I realized is that the first step I had to take was admit that there is a problem and that that problem was not with me. I realized that I had internalized this problem to be something wrong with me. But the problem, as I really see it, is that we live in a world that tells us in big and small ways that we are not enough and that we may never be enough. Now, while all of us get this message, some of us get it more frequently and in more hurtful ways. Some of us get this message when we aren't allowed to speak in movies. Or if we are allowed to speak, it's usually as a caricature sidekick. You go, girl, instead of, and rarely, as a smart, fearless protagonist. We get this message when we are killed, and we are met with a deafening silence in the wake of our deaths. So yeah, there's a problem, but that problem is not with you. And for me, admitting that that problem wasn't with me was the first step in my road to recovery. Step 2, seek out help. So the interesting thing here is that I've had mentors throughout my life. And so it was no surprise when I realized that this is something that I needed help with that I sought out a mentor. What was a surprise to me is actually the benefits of becoming a mentor. And I think that when we're in the beginning or middle of our career, sometimes we focus more on being mentored and less on being a mentor ourselves, right? And I think for me, I was so surprised but heartened at what I found in being a mentee. So of course, my mentors would listen patiently. They gave me hope that this thing that at times felt insurmountable and inescapable, that I'd get through it. But when I was mentoring oftentimes a young woman of color who was freaking out because she felt like she had made a mistake in a meeting, when I talked to her about how she needed to be kinder to herself, have a more fair and balanced view of her performance, in many important ways, I was talking to myself. There's also this great thing about altruism where it takes us out of our mind and it makes us less self-conscious. It makes us more focused on helping someone else instead of what we're doing right or wrong. And I think being in your mind is something that, or kind of spinning in your mind is something that imposter syndrome thrives off of. Step 3, cultivate self-compassion and stop beating yourself up. If I overheard on a street a person talking to another human being the way I sometimes talk to myself, I'd intervene. I'd say, you're in an abusive relationship and you got to get out quickly, right? Because it's not appropriate, right? And I realized that I thought so much about who I was to other people, if I was kind to them, if I was fair to them, but I rarely thought about if I gave myself that same level of respect and compassion. And so I taught myself how to be kinder to myself. When I would see myself getting down on myself, saying things like, you're stupid, everyone thinks you're a fraud, I would talk back to myself and say, I'm not stupid, actually. I graduated from high school before I could vote. I graduated from college before I could drink, and they're damn lucky to have me. And what I noticed, and what I noticed is that the more frequently I did this and I stopped myself in my tracks, the less and less I had to do it over time. Step 4, and here's why Drake is important. Find inspiration in your story, and we'll get to Drake in a second, and the stories of others. So for me, that personal inspiration comes from the fact that I am the proud descendant of Mississippi sharecroppers. And if my grandmother, a fierce woman who helped raise me, if she can take herself and 5 small children from a dirt floor shack in Mississippi to Chicago with less than an 8th grade education, I absolutely can speak in this meeting. Thanks. But thank you. Don't just take inspiration from your story. Take inspiration from the stories of others. And this is where Drake is important. Because if you had told me 10 years ago that one of the best rappers of our time would be a Canadian, biracial, light-skinned, former child star who smiles a lot, which is Drake, I would have never believed you. And yet, here we have Drake. And what I love about Drake and what I find so inspirational about his story is that he epitomizes this notion of when you are excellent at your craft, when you are truly the best, you can redefine the mold of what people expect from a role. So if Drake can become a #1 rapper, I absolutely can be an effective product manager, even if I don't have a technical background. And finally, when in doubt, remember the daily prayer to combat imposter syndrome. Lord, give me the confidence of a mediocre white man. We laugh and we cheer because we inherently recognize the truth in this. And there's actual science behind it. Who here knows about the Dunning-Kruger effect? Anybody? Some folks? Okay, we got some psych nerds. For those who don't know, it's a cognitive bias, basically about cognitive and metacognitive ability to assess how good you are at something. But put simply, it's when incompetent people are too incompetent to know, in fact, that they're incompetent, right? And we've all experienced this. And for me, this totally changed how I viewed imposter syndrome. It went from being a bug to a feature, right? Because I could appreciate it. All right, some people got those jokes. All right, we designed it like that. Okay, but it instead of being something that was wrong with me, it gave me heart because I knew enough to know what I didn't know, and I knew enough and it also helped me understand that I wasn't suffering from Dunning-Kruger. And Dunning-Kruger is interesting because it's actually the polar opposite of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome happens when how good we think we are is far exceeded or is much higher than how good So imposter syndrome, took me a moment. I was like, oh no, I was afraid this would happen. Imposter syndrome is what happens when how good you actually are is far higher than how good you think you are. By contrast, Dunning-Kruger happens when how good you think you are is far higher than how good you actually are. But both are important to the learning process, right? And for me, what I realize is that I'm at a certain point in my development curve, and if I just push on, I can go from, oh man, I'm never going to get this, to, okay, it's starting to make sense, which is where I am today. But here's the takeaway. It's not really about imposter syndrome to me. It's about worthiness. And if I can give one message to you, this beautiful room of bold, beautiful queer and trans women and allies, it's this. You are worthy. You are absolutely worthy. You can make mistakes. It's a part of your development. You do not have to be perfect. You are inherently worthy. And I'd actually love if you all could join me in repeating these words. I am, you know what's coming next? Worthy. We are worthy. And by living in, oh, that's right. And by living in and proclaiming our inherent worthiness. All right, y'all. We can live and we can thrive. Thank you.